And we are live. So nice. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our event. My name is Svetlana. I started No Blah Blah Leadership Community just about a month ago. And my goal is to facilitate the conversation about practical aspects of leadership and also create a community for leaders in product and tech. If you don't want to miss our future events, and I'm sure you don't want to miss them, follow us on YouTube or Meetup group, and also follow the links in the description for the video on YouTube to join our Slack community. So today is a big day. We have our event and we're going to talk about a really hot topic. It's OKRs. It's a planning season, and I'm sure all your companies are doing plans for the next year. I'm also sure that most of them are using OKRs framework because it's kind of became a standard for tech organizations and for startups. And not only the popularity of this framework is growing, but also skepticism around it. People are complaining that it's too much work for little value, that it's a process for the sake of process, that it's just a distraction for the team when they actually have to do their job. I personally don't agree with that. So I invited our guest, Jenny Harold, to discuss and explore how to make OKR framework actually useful for the team. Jenny is a VP of Product Evangelism at GTM Hub. She's also a host of her own great podcast, and simply a person whom I admire. We met with her a couple of years ago, and I was so deeply impressed by her matter-of-fact type of presenting and her in-depth knowledge in the topics of product management and leadership. So I immediately thought, Jenny is a perfect candidate for the guest for No Blah Blah Leadership event. Welcome, Jenny.
So much. I appreciate being here.
It's great to have you here. And before we start, a super quick note. It's a Q&A format. I prepared questions for Jenny on topics related to the process of setting OKRs, the format, and the actual process of using them during the planning period. When you have your questions, just submit them in the chat here on Zoom or on YouTube, and I'm going to make sure that I read and ask Jenny those questions. Deal? Perfect. So are we ready?
I think so.
I think we are. Jenny, the first question is super simple. How did you become an expert of OKRs?
I got hired. I guess the journey, I've always kind of been a productivity nerd. My previous experience was working at Wunderlist, which some people who work in Berlin probably knew of, a to-do list app. And that was kind of my first foray into productivity. And then at some point, I had an opportunity to join this company who specializes in a platform for OKR software. This is not an advertisement for this, but that's kind of what they do. And they were looking for somebody to head up product for a while. So I spent time doing that. And so then by virtue of learning about OKRs, I thought, well, what is this thing and how do people use it and how could it be beneficial? And that's just the love of that. Productivity extended to actually thinking not so much about productivity and outputs as so much as outcomes became kind of the mainstay.
It sounds like a really natural journey into the OKRs. I think then my first question to you as an expert is what benefits OKRs framework can bring to an organization, and also what problems they're not going to solve.
Right. So I think a lot of us know now that, and you've heard this, we're kind of been in this work from home situation for a long time, and that's going to continue to persist, we think, the hybrid workforce. So the ability to understand what the organization needs to accomplish and to be able to communicate that across the business so that people can focus on what their contributions will be, I think is a big benefit in being able to navigate this work from home hybrid work environment. The second thing is, I mean, we're hearing as a result of all this, just the amount of innovation that is happening and the amount of unknowns, right? No one would have predicted 2 years ago that we would be basically in and out of lockdown and in this hybrid work environment for as long as we had. So I think if it's taught us anything, then all of this transition into agility matters, right? And so I would suggest that OKRs are, I've heard Jeff, his name is Jeff Goodhart. He wrote, I think, Lean UX. He wrote Sensors Respond. I just interviewed him for my podcast, actually. And he says that OKRs are the gateway drug for agility. I would venture to agree with that. So it helps with teams that actually are serious about agility to have a framework to provide that backdrop. And then the last is, this is on a personal note. Like, I don't know how frustrating it is for anyone else, but when I was working for big companies and corporates, even smaller businesses, sometimes you look around and you're like, why are we doing this? Like, where are we headed? What is leadership thinking about? What's important for them right now? And being able to say, okay, then what's my place in all of that? Like, one of the greatest benefits, I think, of OKRs is being able to have access to that information in a way that's digestible for everyone. And to be able to make sense of it. And as a result, to make better decisions, hopefully as a result of it. And then furthermore, as a woman in tech, like, I can't even tell you how many times I've been told, Jenny, you need to be more strategic. What the heck does that mean? And then all of a sudden you get introduced to this framework, not that it'll fix, being more strategic, but the idea that you're using data, you're looking at hypothesis, you're taking a different approach. It's not project-based. It really is, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to change? And how do we know that it worked? And then creating a plan around that. Like, having a more strategic viewpoint about the delivery and product engineering, marketing, sales, doesn't matter. There's a lot of benefits outside of what you hear about, which is focus and alignment and stretch and transparency. I think it really hits to the root of all of the concerns that I probably had as an individual contributor and eventually a manager and now a senior leader. To your other part of the question, like, what is it not going to solve?
Yeah.
If you don't have a strategy, it's not going to make you have a strategy. It will highlight you don't have one.
Oops.
But it will not make you have one. Other things that it's not going to solve, if you don't have alignment across your organization, OKRs are not going to magically help you be aligned. Like, your strategy needs to be defined, hopefully by the executive team or the leadership team for product. And then alignment happens when all of the departments agree on that strategy. And then after they formulated, have decided that we're going to use OKRs to be able to deploy it, that is to communicate it across the organization, have other people contribute to it, and that bottoms up, roll up, we'll talk about later. So, and then the last is, if you have cultural issues, like if you have issues with, let's say, failing, because and agility in general, because I think, and I agree with a lot of the agile coaches right now, there's this conversation about senior leaders have this weird idea that agility really means let's just ship faster. And maybe a byproduct of getting your house in order. But it doesn't matter if you don't have the stomach to be able to accept that you don't know everything, even if you have the data, that you're still making hypotheses and they can be wrong. And you could be working on things that may not provide value to the customer like you thought, and you may decide not to ship it. And you may not have a culture that can bear that kind of knowledge. And if you have those kinds of mismatches and expectations, it's not going to fix it. Again, it's going to just exacerbate it. We want you to move faster, fine. But at the end of the day, agile practices are supposed to be centered around how can we learn faster, not necessarily how quickly can we ship, although that is important because we want to test our ideas and figure and not put too much expense around them. You mentioned the word planning season. Yeah. That already that suggests we know a lot, and we don't know what's going to happen. And so it doesn't solve for those things. And I would suggest the main benefits of OKRs is helping everybody to understand the context in which they work, what the senior leaders are thinking about the direction of the business, to highlight if there are alignment issues. They help bring focus. It does do that, and helps people think more strategically, which I think is good for themselves as individuals, as teams, and frankly, for people who want to advance their careers. Like if you can formulate a really solid OKR because you understand the context of your business, what your team's charter is, what the customer wants, and then you're going to measure yourself against whatever progress you want to make to solve a problem that you have hypothesized exists, and you create something and you test your idea and you ship it and you find out and you iterate on that, for goodness sake, like it can help coalesce a lot of those things. Again, it's that gateway drug to agility. I think it's a wonderful tool for that, but it's not a silver bullet, as everyone says. It will not fix underlying problems with your organization, your leadership, a lack of strategy, a lack of vision. It won't, a cultural issue, like it won't fix any of that.
Yeah, I started to understand this because you said that it actually highlights those problems. That's why it became such a controversial tool, especially for organizations who have these problems. Really concrete question, because you said that OKRs are not going to fix the problem that, for example, the company doesn't have a strategy. So if you're a middle manager, for example, a tech lead or a product lead in the organization that doesn't have a solid vision, solid strategy, how do you plan? What do you do with your OKRs?
I would argue you don't ask that question first. You ask, who can you ask?
Mm-hmm.
Like, presumably you have, if you're a middle manager, you have people who you report to. And yeah. I would argue the first conversation you should have is you probably have one-on-ones.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's the usually first approach.
Right. And the first approach, let's assume that you can have one-on-ones and you have a senior leader who you're working with, and you have questions about is like, well, what is our product vision? Mm-hmm. What is our product strategy? Like it literally is their job to help provide that context and the direction. And if enough people of your peers, for example, probably ask those questions, then hopefully at some point that individual will have to respond. Now, let's assume they do. If they do, then you have the context to be able to make the decisions that you need to do. And I would argue every team, if you don't have one, can create a charter for themselves. Like, why do you exist? What are you trying to, why do you exist as a team? Like let's assume that you talk to your senior leader, it's still vague, you're not getting it, and that's a struggle. Then, I mean, you have kind of two options. You can, well, three, I guess. Three, you can ruminate on those things and you can say, well, this sucks and I'm just going to continue to work on projects. Fine. That's one option. I'm just to do what I'm told. Some people do that. They shut down. If you're the more proactive type, then you kind of have the ability to, and hopefully the latitude and wherewithal to make your decisions. Work with your team. Think about why you exist. Think about your customer and start to formulate, at least at the local level, what it is that what is the outcome of the work that you're doing supposed to do for your end customer? Like, think about that. And then you can work backwards. Albeit at a local level, you still will have that sense of purpose and that sense of alignment, at least intra-team, and that's really good. And the last is, and if that's really, really necessary, which I don't necessarily recommend, it's kind of last resort, is maybe you need to go skip level. Maybe you need to go one level up and be like, what is actually going on? And maybe you have the environment where you have open forums like a town hall and you can ask anonymous questions. We actually do this at GTM Hub, where when we have a monthly all hands with the whole company, anyone is able to ask whatever questions they have of senior leadership. And what's really amazing is when that happens and they start to see people upvoting anonymously even, they respond. And so again, it's a forcing function to be able to highlight things that are frustrating to the team and honestly might prevent them from doing the work that they were hired to do, which nobody wants. Like, senior leaders don't want people just randomly doing stuff. That makes no sense. They want the same things you want. They just may not know that they haven't provided enough clarity for it. So give them the benefit of the doubt and ask. They'll most likely, if they're trying to be successful, they will let you know.
That sounds like a really helpful advice that we quite often forget. Just ask and just ask and
ask.
Keep pushing for that. Related to planning period, you mentioned that we don't know the future. Based on this, do you think there is some ideal cadence for the OKRs planning?
No, there is no such thing as an ideal cadence. That's just insane. Like the really interesting thing about this compared to other methodologies, especially like if you think of balanced scorecard, for example, there are people who have literally written the book about balanced scorecard and they own the methodology. There's entire consultancies that plan by this. In the same way, you look at SAFE and there's all this contribution around how that methodology is supposed to be rolled out. And you have all of these consultants that provide that kind of specialization. OKRs are really interesting in that everyone has its own interpretation. It's kind of like the Bible. You know, if you're Christian, you like read the Bible and people interpret it this passage this way and this passage that way. And from the book of John, it's this. I think the same way about OKRs. This guy named John, John Doerr wrote this book. People read it. And some people are like cascading or no cascading. Some people are like score or no score. You know, you have Google who does their flavor and then this team does that flavor. Is there a ideal way to do this? I would suggest whatever, I'm very pragmatic, whatever works for your business. In the same way that you would like debug and iterate on your OKRs, you will debug and iterate and on product, you will do that with your processes. So let's say you're an organization that likes to set a quarterly cadence on OKRs. What does that mean with business, like, you know, business units that have a very clear end of quarter closeout, like sales that have quotas they want to close and finance that needs to tie up loose ends? This might be crazy stressful for them to have to close out all of those processes of business as usual and do OKRs. Does it make sense to do a 3-month period just because somebody said so? No, I would suggest maybe you do it every quarter. Or every 4 months, for example. There's some people who do it half yearly or somewhere thereabouts. There are some people that don't do it in December. They do it in January and start. You know, the sky is the limit on what makes sense for your organization because every business, I would suggest, has their own rhythm. And whatever makes sense for that rhythm, then go do that. Something that is a challenge for some organizations is like, well, Jenny, how do we divorce OKRs from performance management type situations? I'm like, well, why don't you break apart when your performance cycle is from when your OKR cycle is? Because then it's clearly separated and you cannot blend them together unless you really try to force it. Or, you know, just think about it. And then you start creating the playbook that your business operates and expectations therein and why you do it this way. The reason could be we do it every 4 months because we want to make sure that sales and finance and all of the back office functions can close out their quarters as we're supposed to be because it's the rhythm of the business, but we still want to make sure that we're all in alignment at some regular cadence. So let's do it every 4 months. And we're starting to see movement where a lot of bigger organizations are starting to do that because they realize quarterly is too difficult, and that's fine.
That's interesting. When we did OKRs in our organization, we started as usual with quarters. And then at some point we switched to actually every second month. And the reason for that was that the whole situation was quite unclear. We were not sure what direction to take. So the goals were changing quite often.
Right.
So actually with the small periods of planning, we could plan reliably instead of like going with 3 months or 4 months and then missing all the goals completely. So it was really helpful. And then after a couple of iterations, we figured out what the kind of the main directions that we would like to take. And then we switched to quarterly.
Okay.
It worked really well. In terms of the actual process, we spoke about the strategy. How do you cascade OKRs from the strategy? What is the actual process?
I hate that word. I hate the word cascade. I think it's the worst word. Like the word cascade is just insane, like to me, because let's say you cascade it, right? Let's say that you have this overall goal. Someone owns the key result, and then they're supposed to create key results against somebody else's high level key result, and you keep going down.
I see.
eventually you're going to get to this weirdo place where some engineer, sadly, is supposed to figure out how do I come up with key results that help me crush 4,000 bugs. Like, it's just this weird, obscure place that nobody wanted to get to. And now this person is really frustrated because they're supposed to do individual OKRs, but they're supposed to take the upper levels key results. Like, here's the thing. The exercise is not to recreate the hierarchy. That's what happens when you cascade oftentimes is I have a manager or a team lead, and then they're going to tell me what they want me to go do. And then I have to go pick one of those numbers and then support it. So the other thing I think that happens with cascading, I find that's really ultimately frustrating, is it just takes too long. Mm-hmm. Right? Because then everybody has to orchestrate it from a very top-down type of thing. And then the third issue that I have with cascading is this assumes that whoever is at the top, because everything is cascaded, really is dependent upon the top person from creating the most perfect OKR that's supposed to encompass everybody in the business, which I would argue that's what they need to endeavor to do. But like the amount of work to create key results to make sure that everyone is encapsulated in that is really challenging. And so what we're trying to suggest is you have a strategy, you formulated it, now you've created OKRs at the top line that are intended to be sent to the rest of the team. It's the rest of the team's responsibility, I think, to figure out this is what the business wants to do. What are we going to do in response? And so I don't think it is a cascade. If you listen to one of the podcast episodes, again, I talked to Chris Butler over at Cognizant, and I think OKR should be networked. You're building a network of commitments where people are responsible for understanding what senior leadership is expecting as results, and then to create it as flatly as possible, what teams are going to do to connect with that idea. That is how it needs to be done, I think, which means then senior leadership needs to come up with their version of whatever that's going to be for the organization all up. If you want to do it at the department level, that kind of makes sense as well, because each of those business units are going to have a specific worldview and what they're supposed to deliver. Great. And then teams underneath that will be able to ladder up, I think, and make those connections. Mm-hmm. Now, the more junior the teams are, I would recommend then the senior leadership or whoever the team leads or managers that are a part of the stewards of this process should help the teams identify what the problems are to be solved, because maybe they would have a better understanding of what problems the business actually wants to solve. And then the teams are responsible then, once those objectives are helped being set by the senior leadership and middle management maybe, then the teams can be responsible for saying, okay, if that's what we need to do holistically, just notionally, then we as a team will figure out what our key results are going to be. And then they can start to negotiate what the values are of the starting point versus where they want to end up. And that's where the team involvement can really start to percolate, is I want to feel comfortable that the number that I assign myself as a part of this team is something that I feel confident, enough. Mm-hmm. It will be stretch for some teams. It will, for some teams, they're not comfortable with that, and that's fine. I've heard people are like, we want committed goals, which means we are confident we're going to hit it. That again is a cultural and maturity level conversation with OKRs. But in an ideal scenario, that's kind of how I see it go.
I see. Actually, to follow up on the thing that you mentioned in the beginning, that's the question from the chat from Niklas. Hi, Niklas. Jenny, you mentioned you don't know what to plan for in the context of the yearly planning. So can you clarify what you mean by that and how you design OKRs and the uncertainty about the future?
Right. And so, like I was talking again, I've been really lucky to talk to a lot of people on my podcast and a lot of our customers. I think all of us know this, like the further out we plan, the more uncertain it is that whatever will happen at that time will come to fruition, because we're forecasting. We are imagining that in some far future, this thing that we're going to do, and this is why roadmaps are so frustrating sometimes, we want to build this in Q4. Like, how do you know that in Q4 that thing is going to actually produce value? Because what if something else took precedent, or something that you did earlier in the year is something that you should, invest more in? Like, we don't know. Mm-hmm. And so what I would suggest is the closer in that you're thinking about your planning, the more concrete you need to be about what it is that you want to be able to say is your outcome and what you're going to deliver to get to those outcomes. The further out you are, the more suspicious you should be. It is not, I'm not saying don't plan. I'm saying if and when you do, have the level, and this is a word that I've been trying to embody recently, have the humility that you don't know. You do not know what will happen. And part of agility is being able to then adapt. Like maybe mid-year, we realize that Q4, this doesn't make any sense anymore. So why keep it? Like that's just nuts to me. You should be able to reserve the right to go back to your teams and be like, okay, we thought we were going to build that thing, but like we've done some, double diamond design work and our research suggests, and we built prototypes. Nobody cares about this. They don't want it. Because we finally got around to testing, some of our ideas. We prototyped them, and we even started to market it even just to see if anyone would buy this new thing. Nobody wants this. Okay.
You didn't have an OKR.
But we have an OKR, and I'm just like, you reserve the right to be wrong and to learn. It's interesting. I was talking to someone over at Microsoft that does OKRs, and they have an award for teams, like the best team who has learned from their data and has decided not to ship something. Now, here's why agility is amazing, is that you could have decided, I'm going to do this for the next 6 weeks or the next 4 weeks instead of 6 months. And that's the conversation we should be having. And that's why this conversation about what is the cadence for this thing? What is the cadence and appetite for learning? And the more frequent you can do that, the better. Organizationally, it might be too taxing to do it every 2 months, which is why people go with the quarterly or the 4-month, and that makes sense. But locally on the team level, this should be happening pretty quickly, right? And so the further out you're thinking about, the more suspicious should be. Check in at the end of 3 or 4 months. Should we keep going? Should we divest? Should we pivot? What do we do? And then like re-roll it and say, okay, this next quarter plan still makes sense, and keep testing and hypothesizing as you go down. I loved it because I had never heard of this idea until I talked to someone about it, about agile planning with financing. There was this company the enterprise that decided that they wanted to rip and replace. They were going to move a technology from here to this new thing. And the engineering team leads were like, it's going to cost X amount of millions of dollars, and it's going to take us 2 years. The CFO came back and said, you get 6 months. You're going to tell me what your outcomes are. I'm going to give you a quarter of that. And you're going to tell me how you're progressing against those goals and whether or not it still makes sense to continue to invest in this migration. What can you do? I loved it. It's insane. It was awesome. I had never heard about agility being applied to financing before, but it was taking the portfolio and really thinking about it in like increments of full things that they could ship and test and figure out, does that work? Rather than let's do this for 2 years, sink $20 million and X amount of humans have done it, only to find out that it provided net negative or lateral, net neutral benefit to the business. What outcome? All the teams are going to be like, what did we spend all that time doing? Or if it was successful, they waited for 2 years to see that. That's crazy to me. Crazy.
Thanks for your answer. I think that really described really well how to deal with uncertainty. Jump into the next section about the format of OKRs. What are the best practices, and even more important, what are the bad examples of OKRs?
Best practices for OKRs, like in terms of setting, are we talking about in terms of execution?
Like how do you phrase them? Because that's where usually the biggest debates is like, how do you phrase and how do you craft this lines of objectives and lines of key results?
Okay, I'm gonna preface this with, I think there's this like weird obsession about crafting the perfect OKR.
It is.
Like, it's just, we're humans. Like, we are not infallible. We're going to make mistakes to include our OKR setting. And what I've heard is, like, this is what we read in the book, make sure that the title is succinct. Now, why would that be? Like, why? Why logically would we want a succinct title or something that we can easily remember? so that everyone can talk about it. Because if you have like a 3-sentence OKR with a bunch of numbers in it, nobody's going to be like, remember that thing where we had a goal of 3 sentences with all of the numbers in it? Like, no one's going to remember.
Literally what kind of like
right?
situation that I had.
Like this exists in the world. And I'm just like, the reason why we ask you to be very succinct is so that you can use it as a conversational like tool. This is supposed to be a part of your language. Like good OKRs help you remember these things because it's a part of your language. One of my OKRs a year and a half ago, May 2020, we're in 2021, we're about in 2022. I kicked off Dreams with Deadlines, this podcast you alluded to. My OKR was Dreams with Deadlines will be born. That was it. Everyone knew it. It was in my company. Dreams with Deadlines is born. Like everything that I could do to think about what I needed to do to make this thing birthed in the world. And having done that now, since from that time till now, my first month, I released 4 episodes, 814 downloads. Today, I look back at November because we just closed it out. I had 30,000 downloads. Like, this has been a love language for me to be able to say this to my peers, the people who are on this show. Like, I remember it. Other people remember it. It's a conversation. It's language. So succinct titles, make sure that people remember it, to include yourself. Second, take the numbers out of the headline. Like if you have numbers in the objective, that's not a good idea. You don't need to conflate those ideas because the objective is supposed to be what is notionally the spirit of what I want to achieve or my team wants to achieve. Mm-hmm. Right. And then the key results ideally should be measurable. You've heard this. They should be quantitative. And usually they come in the form of, I want to increase this to this. I want to decrease to this. I want to make sure we're above a certain threshold or below, like we don't need X amount of SLA breaches. Maybe that was a problem. We need to make sure that the number of SLA breaches are below this value. Some people will tell you that having yes, no, or Boolean key results, activity-based results are bad. Like this is a debate that will probably exist so long as OKRs are being utilized. I would argue, again, from a pragmatic standpoint, it depends. If you're the type of organization where velocity is a problem, then maybe you should measure the number of things that you've shipped or the velocity of the things, because you just need to get the engine going. And the spirit of it is what has happened, what needs to happen, like behaviorally, so that the organization will benefit and the customer benefits, or ideally both, like, right? And that could be, we need to solve for our teams are not shipping fast enough. We just don't have that practice yet. Fine. Set key results that are around that. Did we ship blah, blah, blah in 2 months? Whatever it is. That might be okay. And again, it's really business specific, but the best practices I think are ones that make sense for your business and the ones that I just articulated. I would like really argue for at the beginning, think about how you're going to grade or score, because at the beginning, it should be like a 50-50, right? We're not sure we're going to make it, because this whole confidence level thing, if you do set them, helps highlight and flag like a forecasting. Unlike other methodologies, you're helping the rest of your team signal. You're like, hey, we're not going to make it. It's not looking good. We need help. Red, So utilize that when you set. And if you're going to go to the degree where you want to use a grading scale, then be able to define that. This is what 30% looks like, or 0.3. This is what 0.5. This is what 0.7 and 1 looks like. That's also good. And then lastly, which often gets forgotten, I think, is when you set OKRs, think about the initiatives that you're going to do. Like, fine, you set your outcomes, you set your goal, everyone remembers it, but what the heck are you actually going to do? And start to plan those activities in concert with that, and check on that in the regular. Now, I think I also covered not good practices, titles that are too long, embedded with numbers, having more qualitative than quantitative measurements. And the last I would say is try not to measure things because they're easy to measure. Like, oh, we have telemetry for this, so we're just going to improve this to this because we already track that number. Like, bullcrap. If you have something that you want to be able to move, then what that again highlights is that you have a lack of data and you need to go source it, go find it, and set key results that actually make sense for your team. And then lastly, this is going to be really controversial, I'm sure, for the people who are listening. I have the suspicion that the like direct reports or people who are actually doing the work versus leadership. Like leadership probably is saying, we have a 10% chance of getting this done. That's what we're going to set as our goal. And then you have people who are like at the ground level who are going to have to ship this thing or have to achieve those results. They're like, I want to be 90% confident that we're going to get it done, and so they quote unquote sandbag or get closer. Like that negotiation between leadership, I think, and the teams that actually have delivered the work, that's where the real conversations, I think, need to be spent more time to define those, again, quantitatively in service of learning. Always in service of learning. How quickly can we do that? Mm-hmm. And that's why you want quantitative measures. You can say, did it work or not? Unequivocally, without any quibble. We got more signups. We got, we achieved less churn. We've got more customer satisfaction, whatever. And you know what? People feel really good about that, I think, because they had impact, this word that everyone talks about but feels elusive. You actually have impact. That's glorious.
Feels good. I really like that you mentioned the initiatives, because I really believe that's something that is kind of missing in the OKRs framework. And there are so many cases where you just set OKRs and then you just go with your work as usual, and you never actually remember what exactly you need to change, what you need to do to get to your objectives. So that's something that has to be added to the framework, I think, at some point. In terms of responsibilities, another debate is a team has to be responsible for OKRs, or a certain person has to be responsible for OKRs. What's your opinion on this?
I've seen it done so many ways. This is a pragmatic thing.
Mm-hmm.
I am of the opinion, if there is no one person responsible, then no one is responsible. You need to be able to identify who that individual is. I love how actually Ben Lamort talks about this, which is in the same way you would have an OKR champion for the organization that's responsible for orchestrating the process. You would have what are key result champions. You will have one person who is responsible for making sure that there's movement on whatever measure that is. Mm-hmm. But that is not to say that other people are not involved in helping achieve that. And so I can see a scenario where this team is responsible for contributing to the results of this, but there is one person identified for shepherding and championing and ensuring that number moves. That is their job. And I think there's goodness in that. And the reason why, and I'm starting to see this happen with some of our customers, which I love, is folks who can quite literally shift careers supporting the strategy of the business and the strategy office of the business by being these persons, that they're responsible for orchestrating those results. And I think that's cool. I am not necessarily a big component of individual key results, simply because that, again, puts a lot of pressure if you're not combining that with some contributing team or individuals that will help that individual. Nobody wants to feel like I'm responsible for this number and I don't have anybody who's identified as help. So in so much as you're able to make that identification known, but the roles of everybody involved in that very clear, I think that's a good place to be.
I see. Thank you. Let's move to the next question from our audience. It's actually here in Zoom, so you can also see it. And it's about transparency of OKRs. After announcing OKRs, I have a feeling that everybody just forgets about them. And it comes to their minds only at the end of OKR period when results are shown. But during the work, it's not clear what the goal a team have and if it's achieved or not. I believe it's quite common problem. I also saw it and we had it in our organization. So how do you make sure that the goals are actually transparent and used in the day-to-day work?
I mean, this is a shameless plug for my company, but this is where I think software can help for sure. Or some sort of mechanism that provides that transparency. I think that's good, but it's a behavioral thing too. If, for example, this is something that was mandated by an executive team or a department lead or somebody who's trying to experiment with this as a pilot program, because often we see that, I would suggest, and this is something that would need to happen from leadership, to say, we take this seriously. So this is what's happening. And for there to be a practice where senior leadership actually goes in front of everyone and says, these are the OKRs, here's the status of those things. And then for them, again, to have a layer of responsibility with OKR champions, whose responsibility is for shepherding the process and ensuring that everybody actually adheres to whatever that is. And then like the complement for OKRs, you'll read, if you read Measure It Matters, and you'll see this in other articles about this, is this CFR, the conversation, feedback, and recognition. I have seen, especially with, let's say, Scrum teams or whatever, they embed this as part of their agile practices, actually. So the onus is not on, let's wait for people to mandate this and then show us an example. If this is something that you really think might be valuable, like I do, then there's nothing stopping for any particular team from coming together and building this as part of their ceremonies. Whereas, every 2 weeks, you're thinking about and prioritizing based on, if we do this thing versus that thing, does this get us closer to that goal? Or does it not? And that's where you can start to make those conversational trade-offs, I think, which again suggests at the beginning, you've worked with your leadership on what is important to the business, and you've negotiated what your key results should be. And it is to such an extent where you believe that this contribution is valuable. You need to believe that as the team. And if that doesn't happen, then you're going to end up in this kind of scenario where nobody believes in this arbitrary number, nobody believes in this being actually helpful. Then of course it's not going to work because it's manufactured. But if you actually create OKRs where you're like, this is a goal that if we achieved would be great, and here's why, and you believed in it, you'll do it anyway. And so I challenge everybody to really take stock of the OKRs they have set. Like what? And here's the thing, this is why I think it's so amazing. I love this framework. It really does, if you work on it and you continue to iterate and make it better, it does provide purpose and meaning to what you do day in and day out. Why? Because at the end of the day, you want a customer to be helped in this way, and you had seen a problem and you've worked with design and research, and they have said, this is a problem. And then they go to product and engineering and they say, okay, here's the problem. We talked to our senior leadership. What if we did this? What result would we see? We would see people doing, I don't know, more of this action or getting through this part of the customer journey. You know what? All of the coding that you did produced that result. All of the work that you did up front with design to try to research it and to prototype it, and then for everyone to build it, it ended in this result. Can you imagine what it would be like if these teams worked together, produced that result, and had better customers? And you know what? Not by accident, by actual intention. You intended to do it. And all of the work that you were doing and all of the practices that you've been practicing, all the lean UX and design thinking and all of these things that are supposed to teach us good stuff about our customer start to draw together to this one thing that's called an outcome. For goodness sake, you feel pretty awesome. I feel awesome that people are listening to my podcast. And I've worked on it diligently for over a year. Yeah. Imagine if you can get increased adoption rates. Imagine if you used to have negative NPS scores, but then your team was like, our customers are not satisfied. Why are they not satisfied? And you find out, it's because, I don't know, the system's not very reliable. What if we worked on stability on the platform? What if we worked on, UX defects? What if we worked on, and then the team started thinking about, this is what my work is going to be in order to achieve this result, and start to see NPS actually improving. And then in a year and a half, hopefully not that long, 2 years time, you're like, we're in the positive, everyone. We've got NPS 20. Everyone freak out. It took us 2 years, but we diligently started seeing the numbers, and we were intentional about what we were going to do, what we were going to measure as a business. This was it. Amazing. We want, 500 new customers in a new market, and sales and marketing and, the localization teams are working on this stuff, and you're in a new market and you're starting to see traction on a number of customers, and you all are doing it together. I think it's amazing. I think when people are giving OKRs a bad rap, it is because they don't understand the reason why they're doing it at all. That is the paramount problem. If that can be solved with leadership, having that conversation, this is why we're doing it. And teams can be internalizing that and be given the opportunity to try things that may not work in service of learning and actually doing agile practices in the way that they were intended, not to ship faster, but to learn faster. I think we would actually see some really pretty amazing, innovative things come to market. I really do believe it. I think OKRs could be the framework to bind it all together.
I see. I think like what you just mentioned is super important, because just tracking OKRs every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's not enough, because it's not easy for everyone to link the actions to the numbers on the slide. So it's actually a really important role and the goal of leadership to make this connection and to help to show that this action led to this kind of result.
I would say the teams as well.
Yeah.
The teams to be able to say, did this work?
Yeah.
Did we contribute to this moving up or down, or did it stay the same? Like, okay, we shipped the thing. Did it produce the results that we want? Let's go check it out. Like that connection, I think, is so vital for any team that really aspires to change customer behavior, because y'all, that's what you're doing. You're changing customer behavior. It's freaking hard. We know that. That's why OKRs are hard, because you're trying to figure out what it is that you want to change.
I see.
Right. And quantify that in a way that everybody can agree to and be like, yeah, that makes sense. We like that. We'll try. It's hard, but we'll try, but it all is in service of making customer lives better and in service of providing meaning and purpose and value to everyone's work that is unequivocal. You can't quibble against it. It's like, no, this team has worked for 6 months to move this number. Look how awesome they are. And to be able to celebrate that rather than we shipped 14 things. Look how awesome we are, unless that's really something you want to solve for. But did anybody care? Are they using it? I love it when I am able to walk around. I used to be like this. Like I would walk over to Reva over our grocery store and be like, somebody's using our to-do list. That's pretty freaking awesome. And then we'd hear the sound, ding,
Yeah.
That feels amazing when you see somebody use your stuff in the wild. Now look at that in aggregate and you're like, we have millions of people using this, or thousands of people. It's really cool.
I see. We have like an interesting conversation in the chat with questions and then answers to this questions.
Yeah. I'm inspiring. Hopefully you see my nickname. It's Fury. Yeah. Like I am excited for what you all are doing. I don't want OKRs to get drawn to the mud because it's just being implemented incorrectly. I think that's silly.
Yeah. And the question was, do you use any software tracking OKRs? And then the same person, Brave Orbit, answers himself or herself, didn't realize GTM Hub is OKR software.
That's right. This is why I'm so passionate about this.
But maybe you can share with us what benefits OKR software, yours or competitors of yours, have compared to just a spreadsheet.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, you can try to figure this out in spreadsheets, but having this visualization of the interconnectedness of all of our stuff, that you're not alone, I think that is amazing. Like when I can open up GTM Hub and I can see that, 14 teams are dedicated to working on improving our NPS, which is a top line thing. Or I can see that these 20 teams are working on, getting proof points, whatever. Mm-hmm. All of this helps me to understand what is happening around me so that I can figure out, hey, maybe I can work with you. Maybe you can work with me. And this self-organization is something that honestly, I don't think Excel spreadsheets can do, to the degree that having an actual dedicated platform for that kind of visualization. 1, 2, look, we're all doing a lot of hard, good work. Like all of us are doing our best, I think. And it really sucks to have to type in that this is what I'm doing and then type in somewhere else, this is how it worked out. Like, sure, maybe you can write a bunch of macros that are going to connect, hundreds of your business systems together so that you get automatic updates on what's actually changed. I think that's a pain in the butt. We are not paid, in my opinion, to be a bunch of data entry monkeys. Like that's not our job. Maybe some people, I don't know. Like, I don't want to do that. What I want to be able to do is actually do good work, look at it and see if it made any bit of difference, And software can do that because if you have integrations for that, that'll help. And then lastly, I mean, I used to do this for myself. I'm sure other people have as well. Creating your own out of the box report, like out of your own reporting in whatever format that's mandated is really annoying. I hate it. It's like the worst part of my job is reporting up and across. I hate it. But imagine for a moment that we had technology and you had presets on like creating whatever visualization, whatever reporting that you want. And that's what you looked at. And if someone had a question, you just send them the link and be like, here's what you need to know. Like when you have a senior leader, it's like, well, what's happening with, these 4 sprint teams or whatnot, or here's the answer. And it's not even, here's what they're shipping. It's here's the outcome of their work and their labor. That, and you have a Jira integration that's pulling in over here. And then you have integration with, I don't know, Amplitude that's, showing you stuff, and you have integration with Segment. I don't know. They're just having all of that stuff and being able to visualize it in a way that makes sense for you, I think is really beneficial. And then I guess the last thing, which I kind of really love about our software in particular, and I'm sure others do it too, is being able to have communication and conversations around our goals that is purpose built for this. I'm not going to create a bunch of comments in Excel spreadsheets or like.
Oh, people do that. People do
my eyes would bleed.
They do. Yeah.
My eyes would bleed. Don't do this to me. Like I would love it to rather look like a message, messaging app where I can see the conversation and the threading. Like that's what I want, because then I can actually follow what's going on instead of here's like this comment and I'm going to jump to that cell for that comment. I'm going to jump to this. It's like, no. Let's actually have the language around our goal setting. Let's have conversations about why things are or are not moving. Let's talk about what we're going to do next in a beautiful screen that I can easily understand. I think technology has its place. Besides us not wanting to pull our hair out and then, gouge our eyes, it really is in service of helping you be more efficient and getting the information you need so that you can go and do your job, make decisions better, and move on. Because we have other things to do with our lives, like spend time with family and friends. I don't need to be creating countless lines of spreadsheet or PowerPoint slides to brief other people. No, I quit. Stop. It's insane.
Totally agree with that. The most common conversation in those comments, either in spreadsheet or hopefully in a better software, are about the actual goals, like the numbers and oh
yeah, is this number up to date? Oh God.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you know what? Technology solves that. If you integrate, like you don't have to be like, when was the last time this was updated? That's the worst. You have a manager that's like running after you, like, can you update your spreadsheet? And it's like, oh God, like, no, it's integrated. Look, real-time updates, amazing. Automate everything.
The data just flows.
It just flows. I did something, we shipped it, more people clicked on it. Great. Numbers over here.
I have the next question for you. Usually when people write down objectives in any type of software, top management treats it as a promise or as a sign with the blood.
Drives me crazy.
Share with us what would be your best argument to argue that.
We are supposed to be able to adapt to business conditions. True?
That's everyone wants.
If I sign this in blood, am I able to adapt to business conditions? No, because I just signed it in blood and I'm giving you my firstborn. Like, this is the antithesis to agile mindsets, in my opinion. At the end of the day, again, and this is something that OKRs cannot solve for, but it will highlight that there is potentially some challenges and problems there. We need to be able to be wrong. Why? Because if we're wrong, we can start working immediately on how to correct. We can start adapting to those business conditions that seem so moving. We could do it much faster because we're not quibbling about this. What we're saying is having an actual conversation of, we learned this about our customer and their behavior and what is in market. And as a result, we have these signals and they suggest we will have to make a different set of decisions to get to do this. Everyone should be able to reserve the right to be wrong and have the humility to accept that what we know now is our best available idea of what we know now, and that is subject to change because people change. What people want will change. What the market wants will change. We need to be able to adapt to that. Does that mean that we change our plans every week? No. But I think the best organizations that adopt this methodology are the ones that could say, we picked the wrong key results, or we didn't gather enough data to set this key result the way that we should. But then to think, well, how did we get there? And really have that true retrospective and then fold this into the learning so that you do it better the next time. But I think the number one argument I have is we are human. We reserve the right to be wrong. At the same token, that is not an excuse to continue to be mired in that way, in that place, but rather, we're going to do better. We're going to learn. And we're going to move forward. But signing in blood does no one any good. Committing is very important, by the way. I'm not suggesting you don't commit. I'm suggesting that there should be latitude to reflect and reset appropriately. And without shame or fear of retribution, because what kind of innovative environment will we have if people's heads are going to be cut off because they didn't reach their key results? Instead, it's like, okay, team X didn't ship this thing because they learned that even if they shipped it, nobody was probably going to use it. The market doesn't want it. And now what? They have to go maintain that thing that nobody wants. That's so demoralizing. That's more expensive. Right? I think so. I think that's just more expensive to the business.
I completely agree. And I also realized that many companies, and actually I had this problem myself, they're trying to solve the performance issues and deliverables issues with OKRs. We just need to set better OKRs because we are not achieving them. I assume that's a wrong statement. I learned something new as well.
I'm glad. Good. I'm glad.
I just realized that. No, this is like, totally makes sense. Also, because we talk about learning a lot, and what would you suggest if in the middle of the planning process, or not the process, but the planning period, we realize that the goals or objectives go wrong? Do we change them to a new one? Do we keep reporting them as the one where we learned that they were wrong? Any advice on this?
I mean, I think that's a really funny question because it's like, it sounds like punishment.
to keep reporting on them?
Yeah, let's just report on something that we know is wrong. Like, in what universe is a team going to be like, yes, I'm going to continue to report on something that I know is inherently wrong and doesn't matter anymore? In
the universe where a team follows the process.
Right? What a waste of absolute time. What a waste. Like, what? Like, to me, that's insane. So we have customers who've done this where in GTM Hub, they'll realize, we're not going to do this. Why are we doing this? This is why. And the teams are like, I don't know why, because you told us so. And that's kind of weird environment. And so the teams are like, well, what do we do, leadership? And leadership's like, okay, we got to make a decision. I thought it was really interesting that one organization decided that they were going to label all of those OKRs as like basically null. Like they don't matter anymore. We paused them. No one needs to report on them anymore. Move on. Now, does that mean they have no responsibilities? No. What they did was they decided this needed to stop, that needed to stop. All of these are paused. Let's look at the reporting. Okay, like 20% of these things are crazy. Fine. Then what do? You recover. You're like, okay, Like, does the whole thing need to be paused? Is the objective still good, but the key results need to be adjusted? Like, start to have those conversations. It makes no sense to continue to report on something that everyone knows is not going to be worked on or make sense anymore, because again, market conditions have changed, customer, desires have changed, all of these things have changed, and we're going to continue working on the same things. Like, that's kind of crazy. What I would suggest is, in the first 2 weeks, maybe, of your planning period, is to kind of make those kind of last minute assessments and say, okay, like, ideally that's when you want to do it, so that you have enough time to actually exercise the initiatives to see if that number will be moved or not, right? Like, that's ideal. Like, if you're doing like a quarter or 4 months, take 2 or 3 weeks to figure it out and settle on a number and keep going. But, if you're halfway, 3/4 of the way through, again, pragmatism for the win. Does this still make sense? Which is why you would want to check in on the regular, because you wouldn't know if you waited till the end of the quarter and you look back, you're like, oh, this was irrelevant. And you're just going to do that again. And that's why you hear these conversations about, well, it's just a waste of time. It's reporting for the sake of reporting. It all stems from that. It's because you're doing something that doesn't make sense and nobody stands behind. So everyone's doing it out of compliance rather than an actual drive to learn. That is the intent.
Got it.
If you hear nothing else from me, let's learn, teams. Let's use OKRs to do it and hold ourselves accountable to it so that we can make our customers' lives better. That's what I want.
I have another question from the chat. This is a really philosophical one.
Ooh.
How do you avoid Goodhart's law?
Oh, Goodhart's law. I love Goodhart's law. So this is,
I'm just going to explain to people if someone doesn't know it, like me. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Yeah. That's really good. So the economist who came up with that and then won a prize for it, and it's amazing. He's super smart. I use this all the time when I talk to people. This is the reason why, folks, and this is best practice, have at least 2 key results for any objective. Here's why. Because of that reason, Goodhart's law. Now, how do you make sure that happens? Well, think about the one thing that you're trying to optimize for, and then think about what you might be shooting yourself for if you were to over optimize on the one thing. For example, and I'll use the one that's really easy for me to be able to contextualize. Let's say you tell your sales teams, we want to, I don't know, like in the next quarter, close 100 deals. Great. And then the team's going to optimize that. And maybe they're going to hit more than 100% because they're like, this is what we do all day long. It's an easy example. But what if they're closing the customers that churn, that don't actually need your product, right? They're over optimizing for this idea of like, well, you told me that I need to close, 100 customers, but 2 months down the line in their contract, they're like, I want out. So then how would you balance that? You're like, well, we want to make sure that they're highly qualified customers, or they're customers that'll stick around. And so you might balance, let's say, closing with something like churn. Are we churning? Like, what do those cohorts look like? And so you're able to, quote unquote, balance the force, if you will. In the same way, let's say that, we're going to focus on our onboarding for a product team. And we want people to get through like this moment in our journey. Great. And everyone optimizes for that, right? But then what happens to your current customer base? Because maybe it's languishing because now another competitor has come in and has provided this functionality, and the transition costs are very low. And so they're going to transition to the new thing because they're like, I can just call bankruptcy here and then move over to this new product. You focus so heavily on onboarding, you got the new customers, but your current customers are kind of languishing. How would you balance that? Then you would look at, the health of your current customer base and however you would proxy that against what you want to optimize for in the quarter, which would be onboarding. So there is a balance at play to think about kind of the different facets. And this is why when someone says to me as a young Jenny, you're not thinking strategically enough, these are the conversations you should be having with your teams and your leadership of, if we do this thing and we optimize it and we hit it, will we be damaging some other part of the business as a result? Guess what? That's a strategic conversation. You just had one. Good job. And you use data to be able to show with evidence why you believe this to be true. And you're up leveling. The more higher level you can be thinking about how that looks across the organization, I guarantee that you're going to start to move the ranks if that's something you want to do in order to get promoted, because you're thinking about how all of these things work together. And you can be thinking about it at a local level, then, within your peer group, within your specific discipline, you think across the disciplines, you think across the business. The broader you can think about this, OKRs are a great frame for you to start having those conversations in your own mind about how Goodhart's law is in fact true. This is why he won the prize, and how you can be thinking about if we do this one thing and optimize it to the hilt, what else could we be damaging? And have those expansion conversations with the team. We could be damaging this part of the business or this or this. We might be neglecting this. How could we have a measure to make sure that this continues or that this improves in concert, whatever. I guarantee you, when you have those professional conversations about moving to the next level and you're starting to talk like this, they're gonna witness this and be like, that person's thinking strategically, good for them. How do we get them more, I don't know, ownership of stuff and responsibility and advance them in business? This is how one way. This is one way you can get there, folks. A lot of people don't think about it that way, but I think you can.
Thank you. That's a great pro tip, says Nicholas from the chat.
Oh, you're welcome.
I completely agree with that. Guys, you have another 10 minutes to ask your questions because we are starting to wrap up. Don't forget to put them in the chat. What I can ask from, I think the last question that I have is about alternatives. We spent like an hour talking about OKRs. Either any alternatives, either any complementary frameworks that you would suggest to use?
I mean, like any of the agile practices are complementary frameworks. We talked about this being a gateway drug to agile practices. So, you know, thinking about your planning period and, you know, using your Kanban to prioritize and marrying that up with OKRs. So your Scrum practices and doing, you know, retrospectives, all of this can be blended together. I think those are all complementary. I honestly believe, and even if I didn't work at GTM Hub, and that's easy for me to say, OKRs are the best evolution in corporate or enterprise, small to medium-sized business, scale up, startup, doesn't matter, goal-setting methodologies that exist on the market. And here's why. Even if we were to look at the other ones, right? The simplicity of being able to understand OKRs, like I have been able to tell people this, like, who have no experience in OKRs and they get it. But if I talk to them about balanced scorecard, they're like, what? Or OGSM, they're like, what? You know, but I can say, look, here's an objective. It's a notional idea that's really succinct of what I want to achieve. I had a personal OKR, for example. This is one I use all the time. Jenny brings sexy back. That was my objective title. Jenny brings sexy back. That was my personal OKR. Everyone smiles and laughs at that because it resonates with them personally, I think. All of us want to be sexy. Well, maybe not, but I do. And I had a set of key results. Like if I were to walk 10,000 steps every day, if I were to keep my calories under a certain count, if I were to get, 8 hours of sleep, if I were to read one book a month, because your mind is also a sexy thing. Like if I did all of these things and I held myself accountable and I actually did have an accountability partner that checked in with me, like the simplicity of OKRs is glorious. 1, 2, the ability to actually network them. Like the fact that I can have 1 to 2 degrees of separation of what I want to achieve from my CEO is hugely valuable to me as a human being. And then lastly, the idea that this also means that my senior leadership team, hopefully, is held accountable for delivering results as well. So it's not just me doing this. They need to do something too, and then look at it all up and see, is it working or not? And the fact that we then, it's kind of this equalizer in a way. They are helping set and coach direction. The teams are responsible for helping support that. The orchestration, the combination of all the interconnectedness of commitments and the work that we're doing together, providing that purpose and meaning without being overly complex. I love it. I mean, of course, there are others, like there's 4DX that I've heard of. That's not necessarily new. You've got SMART goals, but those are usually for individuals. I mentioned OGSM. I've mentioned balanced scorecard. There's tons. Like I've heard of KPI trees. You'll probably hear that if you're in analyst relations, because they do that sort of thing as well. There's tons of them. The pros and cons for each of them. I mean, there's lots of pros, like the fact that you can set goals all together are great. The big con for me, though, is that many of them lack that network of accountability. That's the one thing. And then two, like, this is something, for example, if you use any of the other methodologies, like the fact that as you mature in it, you can stretch and you are kind of embeddedly free to fail. Like if we get 75% of this or whatever, I'm not a complete and utter failure. Like that was a success. Why? Because it was really stinking hard, but we still got 3/4 of the way there. We should feel pretty good about ourselves. But that takes like a mindset shift to get there. And I would not recommend that for the faint of heart or people who are beginning. I would highly recommend you stay closer in and say, like, what are we more comfortable with being able to achieve and negotiate that value so that you get into the habit of succeeding. And then as you get comfortable with setting your key results, stretch a bit more and keep going. In the same way, when I used to train for a marathon, like when I first started, I started from nothing. I was like, I'm not going to try to do like a sub 6 minute, mile pace. Like that's stupid. I will do like a 12.5 minute.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next time you go and run, you try to see if you're going to get faster or go further. It's the same idea. You got to work the muscles. But I still think OKR is the best one. That's why I still work here. And I probably will be an evangelist about this methodology for a long time.
2 questions from the chat.
Yeah.
Let's start with the first one, right? How do you avoid the OKRs planning process from damaging other things, spending too much time in meetings? Yeah, that's like one of the biggest concerns when it comes to OKRs.
Okay. Spending too much time in meetings. I mean, I will say, like, not all meetings are created equal. I really foundationally think there are really 2 kinds of meetings. There are meetings where you need to generate ideas with other people, and there are meetings where you need to come to an agreement on a decision or make a decision, whether you agree or not. We're going to agree to disagree and commit. Honestly, everything else probably can be documented, which is why I suggest software. Because when someone says to me, like, well, where are we at on progress of fill in the blank? Like, wouldn't it be great if there was software that was ingesting that information from all of the myriad of tools that everybody uses across the business, which will vary by business, which is why we have hundreds of them, or like 160 or 70 integrations. Businesses use all kinds of stuff. But then you have this place where you can type in what changed. This is what changed since the last time. This is what we're working on as initiatives, or this is our confidence level. And you just type in 3 different entry points. This gets rolled up and then everybody could see it. And if they had a question, they could just type in your name and be like, what is Jenny up to? There's no meeting that's necessary for that. The meetings really should be, again, like convergence or divergence meetings. And if those are fruitful and profitable for you, and you're actually coming to agreement or brainstorming new ideas of these tactics and initiatives aren't working, we need to try something else because we're not moving the number, I would suggest to you those meetings are valuable, because it provides that direction. But if you're having meetings because you want status updates, which most things devolve to, one of our customers, there's the CEO of a really big company. He said, I hate those meetings. He calls them the show up and throw up meetings. People show up and throw up everything that they're doing. No one cares. No one cares except you, probably. Don't do this to yourself or the teams. Have your processes, use technology, read things and share things so people can read them. The reason why I think senior leaders freak out is because they don't feel like they have that information. And so they're going to ask, and they're going to ask for reports. But what if you all had, like, I don't know, a means and process where you're going to collect the information that individual needs, and they feel satisfied. They're like, oh, this is the progress we're making on this key results. Here's what the team is working on. Here's how much progress they made on that. And all of that was interconnected in some magical way. Shameless plug for GTM Hub again. That'd be glorious. Don't do show up and throw up meetings. The reason probably why you're asking that question is because you're probably in a lot of those and it's a waste of time. You know it. So you have to have conversations. Like, is this meeting valuable? What is the point of this meeting? Can this be done in an email? Like, or documented somewhere.
There's an uncomfortable question.
Or like a message or a regularized I don't know, like synopsis of some report that could have been, I don't know, a dashboard in GTM Hub. I don't know. Yeah, no show up and throw up meetings. Listen to the CEO. I thought it was such a great thing to remember.
This I love this
right?
metaphor.
You show up and everyone's like verbal vomit.
Yeah.
The worst.
The last question. Any thought leaders on this topic you think we should know about?
Oh,
and
yeah.
Also to this, is there a better book than John Doerr on the Measure What Matters?
They're coming. So there are a few. I would say Ben Lamort, like he owns freaking OKRs.com. He's been doing this forever, I feel like. He's got 2 books. There's the OKRs Field Guide, that's amazing. He also has the first book about OKRs that he wrote with Paul Niven. Because DEI is such a thing, we need some female voices out there. Christina Watkey wrote Radical Focus. I think that's a fabulous book. She's a thought leader in this space. She's amazing, the way that she thinks about things. Check out her blog. It's called Elegant Hack. She also has, I think, on O'Reilly, an introduction to OKRs. If you're new to this, I would say like Felipe Castro, definitely read up on his blog. I think he had like a really good, he's going to come out with a book eventually. We've talked about that on the show. Somebody who's kind of new on my radar is Jeff Gotthelf. This is German, so for the German folks, is Gothelf. I think he's based in Lisbon. He has written so many books on this stuff, but he's been testing his material about OKRs. He even has like an introductory course on how to blend this with a lot of the things he knows about. So if you've read Sense and Respond or Lean UX or any of his other stuff, he started right on OKRs. Read on his blog. He's got some really good things. His name is Bart. I forget his last name. He I think owns Moving the Needle. I would suggest checking him out. He is really radical when it comes to OKRs. That's where I got this idea of, it's about networks and not the hierarchy. He was like, there should be 2 to 3 levels of separation between the company level OKRs and everyone else. If it's more than that, maybe you're overcomplicating things. And he explained why, and I thought that was brilliant. So he just came out with a new book. Check it out. And then let's see. So I talked about Jeff. I talked about Felipe, Bart. I guess that would be kind of my short list for sure.
Thank you. Ooh, I think we are done.
Yay.
We answered all the questions, used all our time, and feels like got much smarter and ready to plan for the next year, but only for a bit, not for the whole year, because we know that uncertainty is there.
Well, remember, I'm not against planning. I am for planning, but just not the degree of investment that we do. Knowing that we don't know what's going to happen, Q4 of next year. So plan lightly. Keep it in your mind that you should be suspicious. And as you progress through the year, reinvestigate. Does that still make sense to be out there? Do we need to adapt it anymore? That's the thing. Most people think that product strategy is static. It is not. It's not. It should be adaptive. This is a way. OKRs are a form of being able to help you adapt that strategy because you're evaluating it regularly with your leaders, with the teams, and what is happening with the numbers.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great. The recording is going to be available on YouTube really soon. I'm going to add the time code so you can check the best moments and share the link with others. Awesome. It was great evening. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Svetlana. Talk soon.
Ciao, ciao.